Hello everyone. I hope you all are doing good. Here is one of the bestest story of what if Naruto got all for one from Ninja Scroll. But before we start, I want you all to subscribe to this channel and like this video. Also if possible share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. 4 in 1. Alright, I got the stupid scroll. Let's see what I can learn from it. Naruto Uzumaki was an average tall boy of 15 years old that had blonde spiky hair that reached his shoulders and framed his whiskered face. He had azure-colored eyes that he had been told more than a few times were charming. Naruto was currently wearing an orange jacket that he left open, showing the black t-shirt he wore underneath, and orange pants that matched the color of the jacket. There were some goggles hanging from his neck, and on his feet, he had a pair of blue-colored sandals. At the moment Naruto was looking at the big-ass scroll he had to steal in order to finally pass the beeping academy, and he scowled at the reminder of how he had been treated all his life and how it had been so beeping annoying to deal with that and how difficult it made things for him. Naruto never knew his parents, and he grew up in an orphanage until the Hokage took him away to force him to live alone with a set amount of money for each month. That was one of the many reasons why he disliked the shady old man. He only gave him the bare minimum to survive and turned a blind eye whenever he complained about how he was being treated unfairly by almost everyone else. Seeing that he couldn't count on the village leader's help, Naruto opted to take things into his own hands, so he began stealing. It took him a while, but eventually he got good enough that he could pickpocket even the Jonin ninja. Also, he began to play pranks on those that wronged him in any way, along with breaking into their stores and stealing their food, which helped immensely with his skills on sabotage, infiltrating and stealth. By the time he went to the academy, Naruto was an extremely proficient robber, infiltrator and saboteur, so Naruto decided that he needed actual fighting skills in case he was found out and needed to fight his way out of unwanted situations, so he enrolled into the ninja academy. There was also the fact that ninjas were considered adults the moment they were registered in the military, meaning that it would give him more freedom to do what he wanted, and that was welcomed very much by Naruto, as much as he didn't care about the village. Things, however, weren't going to be as easy as he thought they would be, as he soon found out that the unfair treatment was common with the ninja, all adults and almost every kid. It only took him a month before he just opted for ignoring the instructors when they tried to teach him personally, as he realized that they were trying to mess up his learning, so he only focused on them when they gave general explanations on theories and the like, because he didn't want to be considered dumb, which he most certainly wasn't. He however had needed to learn how to perform ninjutsu, taijutsu and genjutsu at least, so he used his stealth skills to spy on actual ninja. He spent hours observing and memorizing their training regimens, so he could implement them on his own training. He learned how to control his chakra from a bandana-wearing jonin. He learned taijutsu from a weird man wearing a green leotard who used many styles, and he just picked the ones he considered were best moves and the techniques he felt suited him. How to throw kunai and shuriken correctly from a hot purple-haired woman wearing a trench coat and a mini skirt, and finally he learned how to use a sword and kunai to fight from an also hot purple-haired Anbu. Those were his skills, and he wasn't afraid from using them in the academy anytime they were asked to spar. He was undefeated in the ring, seeing as he had more experience, was stronger physically and trained more than anyone else there, which earned him the ire of many boys and the attention of some girls. And even when you took that into account and the fact that he got good grades theoretically, along with being clearly the superior of everyone else in skill, he was still failed because he couldn't do the stupid bunshin. He had way too much chakra for that simple technique, and even though he knew how to balance leaves on his forehead, walk on trees and walk on water, it still wasn't enough to get him to be able to use the clone technique. The instructors used that as their excuse to fail him, since it was necessary for him to do the technique correctly to pass. Even the fact that he could pull off a perfect transformation, and his was solid and real instead of illusory because of the amount of chakra he had, and a seal-less substitution, couldn't get him enough points to pass. After he had stormed out after cursing out all of the instructors, Mizuki had approached him and told him he could graduate if he managed to steal the Forbidden Scroll and learn a technique from it and show that he could effectively use the technique he learned. Naruto had smelt the bullshit right away, but he couldn't pass the opportunity of learning a powerful technique, so he had agreed, and now we found ourselves here. Naruto sat back and unfurled the scroll, and his eyes widened at all the techniques listed there. Let's see. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Solid clones. Uses a lot of chakra. Gives the user back their memories when they dispel. Alright, I'm so learning this one. Naruto declared. and he pulled out a set of smaller scrolls in which he began to copy the variants of the Shadow Clone Jutsu, one which allowed him to create explosive clones and the other one allowed him to make copies of any weapon he threw. Naruto then pocketed the 2 scrolls and began to learn how to use the Kage Bunshin, which was surprisingly easy. It only took him about 20 minutes to successfully learn the technique, and while it was slightly tiring, he could easily create 100 clones and still have chakra to burn. Naruto then picked up the scroll and sat down after he dispelled all the clones. Let's see what else is in here. I might be able to find another jutsu to use. Naruto could always start learning the other 2 jutsu he had written down, but something told him it would be better if he kept his energy, and his instincts had never failed him, so he was not going to start ignoring them now. As Naruto went through the scroll, he found other techniques that he wrote down, so he could learn them later. When he was nearing the end of the scroll, Naruto heard a twig breaking and his herd turned in the direction of that sound to see an angry Iruka approaching him, almost frothing at the mouth with several blood vessels all over his face threatening to pop due to his anger. "Naruto, you idiot, what in the beeping hell were you thinking?" shouted Iruka, uncharacteristically cursing due to his anger. While at first, Iruka hated Naruto like everyone else due to what he held, as the years passed, and he saw Naruto quickly becoming the most skilled of his students, he let go of his hate for the most part and accepted him as a student, nothing more and nothing less, though he was still leery of Naruto becoming stronger, as his fear of what he held never left him. He was glad when he failed, knowing that Naruto's opportunities to get strength would diminish, making him less dangerous for Konoha. He had nearly gotten a heart attack when it had been announced that he had stolen the Forbidden Scroll, somehow knocking out the Sandaime in the process. He had immediately gone in search of the Jinchuriki, fearing the worst and stealing himself in case he needed to kill him, which a small part of him was glad that he had an excuse to avenge his parents, even though he knew that Naruto was not the kyuubi itself, but rather its container. However, Naruto was the closest thing to the kyuubi there was, everyone knew that, so it was no surprise that he had become the scapegoat for the village's hatred, Iruka included. Naruto rolled the scroll back and stood up, making Iruka tense as he thought that Naruto was about to attack him, but he grew confused when Naruto stretched, sighing in relief, not acting in any way that would suggest he knew he had betrayed the village, before he gave Iruka a deadpan look. "Well, considering that I failed the academy for not knowing how to do an illusory copy of myself that is useless in any kind of real combat, even though I had one of the highest theoretical grades and the top practical grades in my year, I decided to take another route to see if I could become a ninja. Mizuki told me that if I could get this scroll and learn a jutsu from it, then I could graduate and become a ninja. Though by your face and your words I now doubt that's the case," said Naruto with a resigned tone as he took a few steps forward and presented the scroll to Iruka, who was shocked. "Take the scroll. I already learned a jutsu from it, but I don't want to get in trouble for a misunderstanding. Also, you should look for Mizuki because I think." Swoosh. Squelch. Naruto tilted his head to the side and tilted his head down in confusion, and his eyes widened when he saw a Fuma shuriken's blade embedded into his flank, completely buried up to the circular core of the weapon. Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. "Ah, shit." That was the only thing Naruto said before he tilted forward and fell to the grassy soil of the clearing, blood quickly pooling around him, origination from his grievous and lethal wound. An even more shocked Iruka could only look at the prone Naruto before he quickly followed the path of the Fuma shuriken, his eyes widening even more when he saw Mizuki standing on a tree branch, face solemn and hands stretched, making it obvious that he was the one who had thrown the ninja weapon. Inside Naruto's mindscape, Kurama, or as he was better known to the world, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, snarled and roared in anger, hate, fear and desperation as he saw his container's mindscape crumbling to pieces as he died. While normally he would have been ecstatic at the chance to escape, Kurama knew that this time it was different, because the way he had been sealed into Naruto. In a normal sealing, like with his first and second Jinchuriki, had either of them died, his body, which was made of chakra, would have simply dispersed and taken a few years to reform, and he would have been on his merry way, killing and eating humans that annoyed him and napping for months to sat his boredom. This time was different. The Yondaime Hokage, Minato Namikaze, and his wife and previous Jinchuriki, Kushina Uzumaki, had sealed him inside their son in such a way that his life was literally tied to that of Naruto's, because they had used the power of the Shinigami to seal him, tying their souls together. While this was bad, it had also come with some benefits for Kurama,
meaning that he could experiment the outside world through Naruto's senses and felt what Naruto felt, meaning that he had something to quench his boredom while sealed inside Naruto.
This also had the effect of Kurama coming to respect Naruto as much as he could respect a human that wasn't his father, meaning that he at least didn't want to see him die pathetically. Seeing Naruto being scorned, hated and sometimes physically assaulted, only for the kid to rise above all hardships and continue to make himself stronger reminded Kurama of himself and his siblings when they had just been recently born. Kurama could sympathize with Naruto's situation, even more seeing that Naruto had no clue behind why he was hated. Because of this, Kurama didn't want Naruto to die an unworthy death, and dying at the hands of a stupid human that was blinded by irrational hatred that had tricked him was the most unworthy death that Kurama had seen in a long time. As the walls crumbled around him and the seal began to break, Kurama saw the chakra-imprinted souls of Minato and Kushina looking on in despair as their son died, unable to do anything to stop it. Kurama would have been able to do so had not the seal been done with the Shinigami's power, but Minato's desire to seal the undivided power of the kyuubi into his newborn son had spelled the death of said son, when his intentions had been the opposite. As the seal broke further, Minato and Kushina gave him pleading looks as they cried, making Kurama respect them as he knew they were pleading for their son's life and not their continued existence. The seal crumpled until it only threads of miasmatic purple power held it together, and Kurama's eyes widened as felt an opening for his chakra to pass through, but it was not going to be enough to save Naruto, but it gave him an idea on what to do. He locked eyes with Minato and Kushina. There might be a way to save him, but if we do it he is not going to be the same, he spoke, his gravely and resounding voice shaking the broken mindscape. Kushina and Minato exchanged looks before they nodded, and Minato spoke. I don't care what you do, kyuubi, as long as my son continues on living. I'm disappointed in the village that forced me to sacrifice the life of my wife, my sons and mine. I don't care what happens as long as Naruto keeps on living, he spoke with resolution and bitterness. Kushina's purple eyes gleamed dangerously. I am of the same mind. The only thing that matters is that my Sochi keeps on living. Beat the village. Do what you have to do, kyuubi. And thank you, she said, vehemently at first, but finally she gave Kurama a beautiful and thankful smile. Kurama inclined his head. Very well, he said, and just when he finished speaking, the seal broke and Kurama felt his soul being grasped by death, but knowing that he still had some seconds before he died, he quickly directed his chakra into Naruto's own body to heal it and then used the yin portion of it to take a hold of his own soul, Minato's, Kushina's and Naruto's, to keep them inside Naruto's body as it healed. The yang portion of his chakra was focused entirely on healing Naruto's body from the wound. As the body healed and changed, the souls of Minato, Kushina, Naruto and Kurama warred against the hold of the Shinigami, merging together to form a stronger, new soul that wanted nothing more than to stay on this plane of existence. Eventually, the body healed completely and the Shinigami roared as he was unable to take the four souls that had become one, and that roar became even angrier when a minuscule portion of his power merged with the new soul, giving it some of his essence, not enough to connect them together, but enough to make the soul even stronger. In the end, the Shinigami left, angry beyond belief but inwardly amused, knowing that things will be more interesting from now on. Forest clearing, outskirts of Konoha. Mizuki and Iruka faced each other, the former calm and the latter angry. Iruka was holding the forbidden scroll as he glared at Mizuki. What's the meaning of this? He roared as held the scroll behind him, keeping it away from Mizuki in case the worst happened. Mizuki scoffed. It is exactly what it is, Iruka. I tricked the kyuubi into stealing the forbidden scroll, so I had a legitimate reason to kill it. I grew tired of seeing it strutting around the village, doing whatever the hell it pleased as if it had done nothing wrong. You understand, don't you, Iruka? The demon killed your parents too, after all, he said, passionately though inwardly he was cursing. His mission was to take the scroll to Orochimaru in exchange of power, but he found himself in this situation and he was trying to run damage control, though he deduced that it could have been worse. If he managed to convince Iruka, their position within Konoha could become more powerful, if they came forward as the ones that killed the kyuubi after it attempted to steal on the village's possessions. Iruka relaxed slightly. I understand, Mizuki. And believe me, I am glad that it cannot harm anyone now, but making the entire village panic and putting the Hokage in danger was not the way to do it, said Iruka, scolding his friend,
not as angry anymore as the reason behind Mizuki's action was revealed. In the end, Iruka let himself be ruled by his hatred and selfishness.
Mizuki smiled as he approached Iruka, inwardly sighing in relief. While he knew that Orochimaru was going to have his head, or worse, he might as well enjoy himself with the perks to come for saving the village. Let's go back and give our report. Though let's omit the part where I tricked it, okay? He joked, laughing. Iruka chuckled and nodded, turning around to walk beside Mizuki. None of them saw Naruto's fingers twitch. Though when a shockwave sent them flying towards the edge of the clearing, they suddenly became aware of another presence in the clearing that they shouldn't have forgotten, because they had thought that he was dead. Turning around and facing the origin of the shockwave, the eyes of Mizuki and Iruka widened to epic proportions as they saw deep purple chakra roaring around the prone form of Naruto, obscuring him as the chakra raged like a condensed fire. A chill went down the spines of Mizuki and Iruka just before the ambient itself was saturated with power and they were forced to their knees as an invisible weight settled on their shoulders and back. They watched with horrified fascination as Naruto's shadowy form began to slowly stand up, using his arms to push his upper body up and then using his legs to get in a standing position. Only the black outline of Naruto's form could be seen through the raging purple inferno that was this sinister, powerful and dense chakra that he was producing. When Naruto's head tilted to the side slowly and two red, round lights appeared where the eyes were supposed to be, Iruka and Mizuki came to the frightening realization that he was looking straight at them. Iruka gasped as a hand was shoved into his chest from his back. He looked down to see a clawed hand grasping his still beating heart before it exploded as the clawed hand clenched a fist around it. Mizuki for his part felt himself being grabbed by his legs and his back before he was ripped in half, his entrails falling to the floor along with his blood and other fluids. The invisible weight disappeared and Iruka and Mizuki began to vomit, their hands supporting their upper bodies as they paled, having watched their own deaths as the killing intent that had suddenly covered the area. When they finished emptying their stomachs and assuring themselves that they were still alive, they dared to look up only for them not to believe what they were seeing. The chakra that had been raging was gone and Naruto stood there, blinking slowly and looking different than before. He was noticeably taller, and his musculature had increased, a fact that could be appreciated due to his ruined clothes, of which only his black shirt and pants remained, the latter being apparently burned until they resembled shorts that didn't go past his knees. His hair was still blonde and spiky, but it seemed tamer, with a fringe falling between his eyes and two longer bangs framing his more angular face. His eyes were a deeper blue and had a slit pupil. The whisker marks on his face were gone and his skin tone was not as tan as before. He looked like a different person altogether. Naruto for his part frowned and he looked down to see that he still had a Fuma shuriken embedded to his side. He inserted one finger into the ring at the center of the weapon and with nonchalance he flicked his wrist. Under the incredulous eyes of Mizuki and Iruka, the Fuma shuriken flew away from Naruto in a blur they could barely follow, losing itself in the darkness of the forest after a second. The two Chunin turned towards Naruto only to see the wound closing itself shut with a hiss. Now, Naruto began to speak and the two Chunin shuddered and flinched at his voice. It was undeniably Naruto's but it was somewhat deeper and it had gained a smooth and softness that was almost unnatural. There was also an edge to it that was almost unnatural. What to do with you, I wonder? He asked himself almost rhetorically, apparently truly undecided on what to do. Mizuki took the decision into his own hands as he shot to his feet and pulled a kunai. I will kill you, demon. He roared before he charged at Naruto, eyes wide with bloodlust and hate as he flew at the blonde. He raised his arm and brought down the bladed weapon, aiming for Naruto's forehead. Clang. Eyes widened again in shock at the sound of metal striking metal, but what was shocking was not that Naruto had successfully blocked Mizuki's strike, which would have been shocking enough since Naruto was just an academy student that failed to graduate and Mizuki was a seasoned Chunin. What was truly shocking was that Naruto had blocked Mizuki's strike using the nail of his right index finger. Mizuki only had time to see that the nail was colored black, had a length of 1.5 inches and had purple tendrils of energy trailing from it before he felt something being shoved into his chest and he gurgled. He looked down, coughing blood, and the last thing he saw before he died was the apathetic, slit eyes of Naruto Uzumaki looking at him as he had his arms shoved into his chest up to his elbow. Iruka couldn't believe his eyes as he saw Naruto discarding Mizuki's body as if it was nothing after impaling him through the chest after making a spear point with his clawed hand. He shuddered when Naruto turned towards him and he prepared himself to be killed in such a manner only for Naruto to shock him once again. Naruto smiled softly and approached Iruka, presenting a normal-looking hand to him in a clear offering of help to get up. Iruka gathered his wits about himself and accepted the help shakily and nervously. Well, that's one issue solved. I don't know how I survived, but I'm thankful. Iruka-sensei, can you go with me and help me explain the Hokage that it was just a misunderstanding and that Mizuki was the one who tricked me and attempted to kill me for some reason? Naruto asked, his voice not giving a clear indication of what he was feeling, only genuine curiosity about whether Iruka was going to go with him to explain the situation to the Hokage or not. Iruka, knowing that his life was hanging from a thread, nodded slowly. Yeah, sure Naruto. Let's go, he said, cradling the forbidden scroll almost as if it somehow could save him if Naruto decided to kill. For some reason, Iruka knew that what had happened with Mizuki had not been a fluke and that if Naruto decided to kill him he would be dead before he realized it. Smile widening, Naruto inclined his head at Iruka. Thank you. Maybe I could even become an official ninja. I think I proved that I'm ready, stupid Bunshin notwithstanding, nay? Straining a smile that looked decidedly nervous, Iruka shakily nodded. Yeah. By the way, can you explain what Mizuki meant when he called me a demon? Iruka gulped and he looked at Naruto, who had asked the question pleasantly and had an honestly curious look on his face. In spite of that, Iruka felt that if he refused to answer the question or attempted to lie, he would be minced meat in the next set of seconds, so he took a deep breath and answered, knowing that execution for breaking the law was better than being torn to shreds. Well, you see, 15 years ago the kyuubi attacked Konoha out of nowhere and as the two of them walked away from the clearing, Iruka didn't notice Mizuki's dead body igniting into flames that turned him into ashes that scattered in the winds, nor he noticed the fact that Naruto's arm that had been supposed to be covered in blood looked pristine. Konoha, Hokage's office, and that's what happened, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, gave Iruka a neutral look, the forbidden scroll of sealing resting on his desk, making the already nervous and pale Chunin even more uncomfortable. He flicked his eyes to one of the Anbu hidden in his office, and Inuzuka, who nodded his head, indicating that there had not been a shift in Iruka's heartbeat or breathing, which accounted for the Chunin speaking the truth, which troubled Hiruzen deeply. Turning concerned eyes to Naruto, he spoke. I see. Are you sure you don't remember anything, Naruto-kun? While he showed a concerned expression on the outside, on the inside his mind was whirling 100 miles a second, trying to make sense of what happened. While he didn't necessarily dislike or hate Naruto, he was extremely wary of the thing he held inside of him. It was the reason why he had given him a less than decent apartment, only enough money to survive, and did nothing to stop the village's treatment of him. Naruto shrugged his shoulders, an even expression on his oh-so-different face. He looked so much like Minato right now that Hiruzen felt a pang of guilt that he ruthlessly squashed. What happened in the past, stayed in the past. I don't, Hokage-sama, said Naruto evenly, making Hiruzen flinch. Naruto used to call him Hokage Oji, though he couldn't really blame the young man, since he had intentionally withheld the information of him being the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, which Iruka had revealed to him the moment it couldn't be hidden anymore. One moment there is a Fuma shuriken stabbing my entrails through the side, and the next I have my hand shoved through Mizuki's chest after I vaguely heard him call me a demon. It's kind of fuzzy, really. After that everything happened as Iruka-sensei told you it did. Hiruzen turned towards the same Anbu again. The Anbu nodded his head. Hiruzen sighed. That's all right, Naruto-kun. I just wanted confirmation that nothing was wrong with the seal, and since you appear in control of yourself, then I guess nothing is amiss. Also, considering that you are skilled enough to infiltrate the Hokage Tower, retrieve the forbidden scroll of sealing and learn a jutsu from it, I will allow you to become a genin. Come here tomorrow to get your headband, registration number and photo taken. Team assignments will take place 1 week from now. Naruto, knowing that he was dismissed, inclined his head at the Hokage and then at Iruka before he turned around and walked towards the exit. Hiruzen's heart skipped a beat, however, when Naruto also inclined his head in the direction of the Anbu he had been using to see if they were speaking the truth, before he finally walked out of the room after shaking his head. Hiruzen gave an explosively tired sigh as he let himself rest limply on his chair. I'm too beeping old for this shit. Hokage-sama? He turned tired eyes towards the hesitant Iruka. Yes? There is another thing that I left out. Groaning, Hiruzen straightened up. What is it? Gulping in fear, Iruka began to speak. Before Naruto woke up, there was a surge of powerful, sinister and dense chakra originating from him and Hiruzen groaned. Yep. Too beeping old. Konoha, Naruto's apartment. The moment the door closed behind him, the being that commanded Naruto Uzumaki's improved body frowned.
He looked down at his hands and he watched with a sense of pondering fascination as his fingernails blackened before they sharpened until they looked like they belonged to a wild animal, tendrils of purple chakra coming from the claws that he now sported. Frowning further, he let his claws turn back into normal nails and he walked through the crappy apartment he knew and remembered belonged to him, but felt like he had never been there before.
The apartment was extremely messy, and with another frown, 4 clones of him appeared and they began to clean up the place, knowing that it was what Kushina and Minato wanted, even though Naruto and Kurama didn't care, which resulted in him deciding to clean up the place. As the clones cleaned the filth with an efficiency and grace that would have surprised anyone that saw it, the being walked towards Naruto's reclining one-person couch that he stole a few months ago, getting comfortable against the soft, good-quality leather it provided.
The being knew what it was. A combination of the souls of Naruto Uzumaki, Kushina Uzumaki, Minato Namikaze and Kurama. He had all their memories, all of their experiences and all of their emotions. The being knew that he was that and much, much more. After all, the result was always more than the sum of its parts, and that rule applied to whatever the being was after Kurama did what he did to save them all from death.
The being was thankful towards Kurama, or was he thankful to himself, since he was also Kurama, for doing what he did, since it kept him alive though he was not who and what he was before his life was put in peril. After a few moments, he decided that it didn't matter since he was alive, and even though he was more than just that, he was still Naruto Uzumaki, something that the Minato and Kushina in him were thankful for. Thinking of them, the being frowned before smiling softly. As Naruto, he was glad that he had parents that loved him enough to give their lives for him, and as Minato and Kushina, he was happy that Naruto would have forgiven them and loved them in spite of everything their actions brought upon him. Kurama found the whole thing disgusting, which amused Naruto, Minato and Kushina. Frowning again, the being decided on what to do from now on. All of his parts desired revenge against the village, though the methods differed greatly. Naruto wanted to humiliate the entire village with a prank. Kushina wanted to cleave everyone in half with her sword. Minato wanted poetic justice and Kurama wanted to kill and devour them all. The being could do all that if he so wished. As a matter of fact, he could do anything, with the power and knowledge now at his disposal. Well, not everything right now since he had so much power that he couldn't control it all, but eventually he would be a god walking among men, since he was more than what even Kurama used to be. In the end, the being decided that humiliation and immediate death was too soft of a punishment and decided to go with something more along with Minato's ideas. After thinking for a few moments, the being decided that he would get respect and recognition from the entire village, and when they all loved him and worshipped him, he would reveal the truth about who his parents are, what were their wishes and the nature of the seal, to see them drown in their own guilt and despair. After that, he would see about world domination or something that went along those lines. In light of this, the being decided that his name was Naruto Uzumaki from now on, seeing that that was how people knew him as and that it was the identity of the most complete soul that made him up. Kushina and Minato agreed wholeheartedly, happy since this way it felt like their son was truly alive. Kurama was grumpy about it, so he decided that should he need an alter ego in case he needed to do something that Naruto Uzumaki couldn't absolutely be seen doing, he would take up the name Kurama. Kurama was mollified. The others were amused. The moment his decision was made was the moment the 4 clones finished cleaning the apartment, which looked impeccable and nothing like the pig house that it was before. Satisfied, the self-baptized Naruto moved towards his bed, laid on it and closed his eyes. He didn't need to sleep, for he was above any form of mental and physical exhaustion, but he needed to organize his soul, his memories, his feelings, his experiences, etc. He wasn't still one being, and he wanted to change that, as being in the middle of a 4-way debate was kind of annoying. Tomorrow he will truly be more than just the sum of his parts. The next day, Naruto Uzumaki's eyes opened the next day, and after stretching his body like a cat, he felt surprisingly stiff. He walked towards his bathroom to clean his face, his mouth and his body, knowing that people preferred it when others smelt and looked nice. His physical appearance was more than pleasant to the opposite Beep, according to Kushina's memories and opinion, and he was glad for it, feelings that came from the Naruto and Minato in him. He grimaced slightly. While he had successfully become one in entirety, it was going to take a while before he saw everything as his and not belonging to those that made him up. After walking out of the shower, feeling proud because of the size of his member, which was way bigger than average according to Kushina's memories, though Minato was jealous and Kushina was both proud and slightly aroused and Kurama felt disgusted and, this is going to get annoying really fast if I don't get used to these feelings being mine, thought Naruto. For a moment, he was worried that the Kushina in him would make him feel attracted to other men, but he quickly squashed that feeling as he realized that both Minato and Naruto liked females exclusively and Kushina herself liked women as much as she liked men, meaning that his preference for women overrode any lingering attracting he could have developed for members of the same Beep. What aroused him, he decided after a few moments of thinking, was the fact that with the size of his member any female he used it on will come back crawling to him for more, which suited him just fine. The extreme pervert in him, which he knew came from Naruto, Minato and Kushina, wanted a harem and a harem he shall get. While the Kurama in him was disgusted by those thoughts full of human attraction and emotions, it was quickly overruled by the amount of personal pleasure he would get if he got a harem. Besides, having a group of loyal and powerful women at his beck and call could prove extremely useful in the future. Speaking of perverseness, he was going to be having unpleasant words with Jiraiya whenever he deigned to show up. Naruto shook his head of his thoughts and frowned as he looked at his closet, which was full of orange pants, orange jackets and black undershirts that would be a size too small for him with his newfound height and musculature. Also, while orange was a pleasing enough color, not everyone liked it, and for Naruto's plans of revenge he needed people to start liking him. Thankfully, he could solve the issue easily by buying new clothes, though at the moment he will have to make do. He slipped on the pants, which reached just above his ankles, and pulled on the black shirt, which left nothing of his upper body to the imagination. After that he put on his blue sandals and made sure that everything was in order before he slipped out of his apartment and into the busy streets of Konoha. He had a few errands to run before he started to train all of his abilities and skills. Walking to the streets of Konoha, Naruto felt amused as people made double takes as they looked at him, though once they realized who he was they went back to ignore him or glaring. Well, not exactly. Men did that, and a few older women too, but most of the younger women looked very conflicted now and he could feel their lust stirring for him, though it was being tempered by the amount of negative emotions they felt towards him. He paused for a moment before he continued on his way, smiling lightly as he did so, which resulted in more inner conflict within the women as the expression on his face made him look positively angelic. The reason for his smile, however, was not because he was aware of the effect he had on the opposite Beep, though he now knew as he felt their lust and attraction increasing as their negative emotions began to reside slightly. He decided to smile like that more at that moment. In any case, the reason for his smile was because Naruto could sense the emotions within people at a certain range, which he quickly determined was 100 meters passively and twice as that if he concentrated. He also knew that his range could increase with training, and the technique was too useful not to train to its limits if it had won on the first place. Kurama had only been able to detect negative emotions because he was only a Biju that had come from an even greater being that was full of hate and malice, meaning that those had been the emotions that Kurama had been more attuned to. When Kurama had become a part of him and the others, he had recognized other, positive emotions, and his ability to sense emotions had evolved in accordance to recognize those emotions. This ability will help him determine who was trustworthy or not, who he had to be wary of and who needed immediate disposal. After a few minutes Naruto arrived at the tower and he followed Hiruzen's scent of fire and tobacco to an office that was on the floor below where the Hokage office was. He paused again for a second before he continued, now aware of his heightened senses of smell, sight and hearing. He could smell the vaginal fluids of that particularly pretty girl that was 300 meters away, he could hear a baby wailing in a room and his annoyed parents trying to have beep on the next room, and finally he could see the spider crawling on the ceiling 20 meters away from him with enough clarity that he could count all the small's hairs it had, 1,286. Smile wider, he slipped into his office and regarded Hiruzen with an even look, recalling that he was angry at him for not telling him the reason the village hated Naruto Uzumaki even though it was obvious he knew. He had to resist the urge to stab him to death that came from Kushina's memories and feelings, though he didn't show anything outwardly, thanks to Minato's inhuman self-control. It was the reason he had been able to lie so easily last night even with an Inuzuka in the same room. "Ah, Naruto-kun. I've expecting you. Here is your forehead protector," he said with a grandfatherly smile and pulling out a piece of blue cloth with a metal band attached to it that had Konoha's symbol carved into it. Naruto made sure to smile on the outside, but in the inside, he was regarding Sarutobi with suspicion, because of the emotions he was getting from the old man. As he tied the forehead protector around his bicep, since he felt it didn't suit him around his forehead with his hairstyle, Naruto focused on the motions coming from Sarutobi. Caution, wariness, suspicion, and hidden behind all of that a healthy amount of resentment. It took him a moment, but he deduced that Hiruzen subconsciously blamed him for the death of his wife, though he knew that it was that masked man with the Sharingan who did it, but there was nothing he could do about it. He would keep the Sandaime at arm's length and prove himself loyal with his service in order to take away any scrutiny that had befallen him due to what happened yesterday. "Thank you again, Hokage-sama. Being a ninja has been my dream, and seeing that my efforts are recognized despite everything that happened means a lot to me," he said instead, putting some warmth on his tone which served to calm Hiruzen slightly. "I will go take my picture now and bring it back to get my registration number, if that is all right with you." When Hiruzen nodded with his own fake smile, Naruto moved to the roof, took a normal-looking picture and went back to Hiruzen, gave him his picture and got his registration number. He waved at the Hokage, who reminded him about team assignments before he slipped out of the room. Just as he did so, a brown-haired kid wearing a helmet and a scarf that was thrice as long as he was tall, passed by him, giving him the impression of determination and desire to be recognized. He paused before he shrugged and continued onwards before a Jonin, wearing a bandana and circular sunglasses, passed by him, giving him the impression of exasperation and impatience. Naruto paused again. "Odd," he muttered before shrugging and walking out of the tower. Konoha, Eastern District. Naruto finally arrived at his next destination, and with a nostalgic expression of his face he looked at the two-floor house that stood in front of him. While in the memories of Minato and Kushina the house was painted white and red, now it was colored green and brown. It was undoubtedly the house where Kushina and Minato used to live in. Many memories filled his head, many of which had him feeling aroused, embarrassed and disgusted at the same time. He shook his head and made sure that no one was seeing him before he blurred out of existence, using the speed of this improved body granted him, which by his estimation, using Minato's knowledge, was the speed of an average Jonin, which was shocking considering he was just a recently graduated genin. Cue snort of amusement. Using Naruto's infiltration skills, he entered the house through the window, not making any noise, though it wouldn't have been necessary as he didn't smell, hear or sense anyone within the house at the moment, though it never failed to be cautious and it served as training anyway. Making his way through the house, inwardly cringing and frowning at the many changes the house had gone through due to the owners it had house after Minato and Kushina, Naruto reached a seemingly normal wall. He kneeled then and went through a set of hand seals before he pressed his palm to the wooden floor in front of him. "Fuin. Kai," he muttered, and he felt his chakra being beeped into a seal that suddenly appeared. Naruto stood up and stepped back, and he watched the floor and part of the wall shift until there was a set of stairs leading down. Smiling, Naruto went down the stairs, torches lighting up as he walked by them to provide him vision, though he didn't need them since he could see perfectly in the dark. Naruto eventually reached a set of wooden doors and opened them, smiling wide when he saw that everything was just as it had been left. There were rows upon rows filled with three-pronged kunai with the Hiraishin marker on them. There were also many scrolls used for fuinjutsu of many types, from simple sealing to more complexes, matrices and formulas, and finally, right in the middle of the room, resting in an altar, was a beautiful katana with a black blade that gleamed red against the light of the torches that lit up the room the moment he opened the door. 3 clones appeared at his side and they went with their tasks. One was to gather all the kunai, another one was to gather the scrolls that were not fuinjutsu and those that were complexes, fuinjutsu formulas and matrices, while the last one was to gather enough storage scrolls to put everything in them for easier carriage. Naruto himself went to retrieve the katana, which belonged to Kushina. The blade was called Shishiohime, Blood Princess, because the blade looked like blood and because it used blood to keep itself in perfect conditions. Also, the blade was made with chakra metal, meaning that elemental chakra could be channeled through it. It was a magnificent and deadly blade, and it was now Naruto's to wield, which he was going to do so with pride and eagerness. He picked up the blade and admired its deadly beauty and perfect balance and weight until his clones dispelled, letting him know that they were done with their tasks. He sheathed Chichiyo-hime into her decorated scabbard and awkwardly put it at his waist using his pants, belt loops to keep it there. When he changed his outfit, Naruto would remind to get a sash to make carrying his blade easier and not as awkward. After that he picked up the 3 filled storage scrolls, slipped them into his pockets and exited the underground room. He went back up the stairs and into the room of the house he had gone underground from. Using similar hand seals to the ones he performed, he sealed the room back again, not bothering to collapse it since it would generate a small tremor that would gather unnecessary attention to this side of the village. Besides, the room was empty now, and if no one had found it in 15 years, then no one was going to find it now. Naruto slipped out of the house, making sure that everything was left in the way it was before he entered, and with another blur of speed he appeared in an alley a few blocks away from the house, and he walked out of it putting a pondering and annoyed look on his face that made it seem like he had been attempting to take a shortcut only to get it wrong, which made it so people didn't question him randomly appearing out of the alley. When he was sure that everyone was looking at him with either hostility or lust, or an unholy combination of both, or were ignoring him, he began to make his way towards Training Ground 43, which was isolated because of its closeness to Training Ground 44, aka the Forest of Death. As he made his way towards the training ground, Naruto ran his hand across his new katana's sheath, glad that he had decided to look for it and everything else that Kushina and Minato had left there. The reason why he decided to get everything that was left there were obvious. The first one was to prevent anyone from getting them, as unlikely as that event was of ever happening. The unfinished formulas and finished matrices of Fuinjutsu that were there could prove disastrous to even him as he was now if left in the wrong hands, so it was best they stayed with him so only he could use them and or finish them. The other reason was because Naruto was the main and dominant consciousness of the new being, and he wanted a physical connection to those that had been his parents, in the form of the katana of his mother and the 3-pronged kunai his father used to perform the infamous Hiraishin, which by the way was going to take him a while before he could use. He first needed to change the formula to tie it to him and through it the matrix to respond to him, and if that wasn't enough, his body, even after changing, was not prepared for the strain that performing such a technique caused. While he estimated that if he focused solely on it he wouldn't take more than 3 months to do it, he needed to focus on many other things to make sure that his plans for the future bore fruit. The first thing he needed to do was to get control over his chakra, which he knew was the most abundant, powerful and dense in the world right now. But it meant nothing since he could barely control it, only able to manifest his claws and make clones, which was basic. Thankfully, chakra control revolved around experience and sensations, so that issue could be solved relatively fast through the usage of clones. The other thing he needed to do was to make sure that his development went according to what Naruto Uzumaki was known to do, so no one questioned him if he suddenly could flatten mountains with a thought, which he could do, albeit only theoretically at the moment. His change in personality could be explained to him finding out he was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, so was free to act as he wanted. Going back to his development, Naruto Uzumaki was known to be extremely proficient in the arts of infiltration, stealth and sabotage thanks to the numerous pranks he did across the village, capable of targeting even Anbu successfully. Very few got the implications of what that could mean, and the few who did, looked at Naruto with wariness and trepidation. Now even more that it was known that he had managed to infiltrate the Hokage tower and steal something from it. Also, he was known to be well versed in ninjutsu thanks to his mastery of the henge and kawarimi, though it confused people why he never seemed to get the bunshin right. He knew that it was because Naruto Uzumaki had an impressive amount of chakra for his age, due to being an Uzumaki and a Jinchuriki, and since he hadn't had access to more advanced control training for his chakra before, he could only do basic things with it, like transforming into other things and substituting himself with other objects. Creating illusory copies of himself was beyond Naruto Uzumaki's abilities with the control he had over his chakra. It was because of that reason that Naruto wanted to control his own, which was an ocean compared to the measly drop that Naruto Uzumaki used to possess. Naruto Uzumaki was also above average in shurikenjutsu, able of hitting targets dead center always, whether they were moving or not didn't matter. Also, he was considered the best in taijutsu among his peers, never having lost a spar while in the academy, which would help him explain his skills in taijutsu after this week passed.
The only skill that he wanted to use that would go against what people knew about Naruto was Kenjutsu, but everyone knew that he could use kunai to fight, having been seen going through katas a few times by his peers, so that could be explained by him experimenting. The sword at his hip could be explained as him finding it somewhere, though he hoped to not encounter Kakashi Hatake, since he was the only one to have ever seen the unsheathed Shishio-hime and still be alive.
The chances of them meeting was slim, since Kakashi hadn't contacted nor interacted with him before when he was just Naruto Uzumaki, even though he had to know who he was. Kakashi's closeness with Minato and Kushina could prove to be problematic, so he needed to make a few decisions just in case he encountered the man, which as slim as it was in a village the size of Konoha, there were still some chances. By the way, Kakashi had a lot to answer for. Naruto blinked and beeped his head once he noticed that he had arrived at Training Ground 43, and he smiled when he realized that it was perfect. It was a clearing that had to be at least 4 miles in diameter, and there was a body of water to the north and very tall and numerous trees to the east. There was a gigantic fenced wall to the west, which separated Training Ground 43 from Training Ground 44. The Forest of Death. With his acute sense of hearing and smell, he could sense the many beasts that called the place their home. Though if he was honest with himself, Naruto also found the place homey, in a disturbing kind of way. Perhaps he could go train there sometime? Once he found himself in the middle of the clearing, Naruto nodded to himself. "All right. Let's get to work," he said before raising his hands and making a cross with the index and middle fingers of both of his hands in front of his chest. "Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he said simply and channeled his chakra into the technique. There was a gigantic explosion of smoke as the air was saturated with chakra and the technique was performed. When the smoke cleared, Naruto could be seen surrounded by an army of his clones. Knowing that he had created exactly 500 clones, he addressed them all. "I want 300 of you to work exclusively in chakra control. 100 will go to that lake and work on water walking. Another 100 will use those trees for surface sticking, and the other 100 will stick leaves to their bodies and spin them using chakra. After all of the exercises are mastered, we will combine them. And after that is done, clones will spar with each other using the chakra control techniques to truly master them." 300 heads nodded in unison before they went to perform their tasks. Naruto addressed then the remaining clones. 100 of you will work to perfect the techniques that Uzumaki Naruto was known to have, along with learning and mastering the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Bunshin Dabahuka and Shunshin no Jutsu. The first two techniques Hiruzen Sarutobi knows that I copied them from the Forbidden Scroll, and the Shunshin could be explained as me picking it up somewhere. 100 heads nodded before they moved to an unused part of the clearing to get to work. Naruto then turned towards the remaining clones and smiled almost predatorily. "You lot will attack me with everything you have as long as they are purely physical attacks, and I will defend myself in such a manner too. I have memories of different styles which I will need to merge in order to come up with the perfect one for me," he said before he took Shishio-hime and sealed it in one of the scrolls. "I decided not to use the blade for the time being, until my possession of it and Kenjutsu knowledge could be properly explained." The clones nodded before they matched his predatory expression, pulling out kunais, extending their claws or unsheathing their own copy of Shishio-hime, since it had been at his waist when he created them. The original's expression didn't change, and he pulled out his own kunai from the holster on his right leg and held it on his right hand. Crouching slightly and getting into a ready position, his smirk widened and he made a "bring it on" motion with his left hand. "Come. Konoha, Hokage's office, he knows," said Hiruzen simply at the only other occupant of the room. Said occupant was a silver-haired man wearing the standard Jonin uniform in Konoha, and he had almost his entire face covered by a face mask and his forehead protector. The man raised his only visible eyebrow at the Sandame. "Is that so? How did he find out? And more importantly, is he going to be threat?" He asked the serious questions, though his voice has a tone of boredom and uncaring to it. Hiruzen sighed. Iruka-kun was forced to tell him when Mizuki called him a demon just before he attacked Naruto with the intent to kill, which resulted in his death by Naruto, whom we believe was being possessed by the beast's chakra at that time, since the way he killed Mizuki was too animalistic to have been done by a human in control of themselves. Though he seems to be in complete control of all of his faculties now, and he doesn't seem to recall anything after he almost died and before he heard Mizuki calling him a demon and attacking him, he claimed that he reacted on instinct. Was he telling the truth? Yes. Kakashi med in though before shrugging his shoulders. Then the only thing we have to determine is if he is going to be a threat to Konoha or not, he said, but not really caring. He knew that Naruto was the son of his sensei Minato and his lover Kushina, but he also knew that he was the container of the kyuubi, which was the beast that had caused the death of the only people he had left in the world. Because of this, he had no kind of feelings for the kid and he doubted he would develop any in either way, so he didn't care what happened to him. Hiruzen nodded. Exactly, which is something that is going to fall on your shoulders. You have the Sharingan, which can subdue the power of a Biju. I will assign him as one of your students, along with Sasuke Uchiha and another one that I am unsure at the moment. In either case, you must keep a close eye on him, monitor his growth to make sure that he doesn't gain strength too fast and focus on training Sasuke so he can unlock his Sharingan, which would help in case Naruto loses control of the kyuubi. Kakashi, though inwardly annoyed, nodded his head. It was an order from the village leader and there was a very real concern there. Understood. And should I decide whether he is a threat or not, what should I do? If he is a threat, incapacitate him so we can extract the kyuubi and then kill him. Another container could be found easily enough. Should he be still loyal and willing to serve Konoha, then you will stop monitoring him and help him cultivate his skills as a ninja along with encouraging his loyalty, which is what you must do as a sensei anyway. Kakashi nodded, and knowing a dismissal when he heard it, he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Hiruzen for his part pondered about if his decision was the correct one or not and in the end, he decided that it was. While Naruto had only showed to be angry with him for keeping the secret from him even though he had asked him and he had told him that he didn't know, when it was obvious that he knew the reason behind the village's hatred, there wasn't any other indication that he wanted to flee the village or get revenge against it. As a matter of fact, he seemed determined to show that he wasn't what the village though it was, which pleased Hiruzen. Still, there was the real threat of him losing control of the beast, and they needed to be prepared for it. It was the reason why he was going to put one experimented Sharingan user and another potential user in the same team with him, just in case that happened. And to be truthful, Sasuke Uchiha worried him deeply. He and his mother, Makoto, were the only survivors of Itachi Uchiha's, Sasuke's older brother, massacre. A massacre which he had ordered to prevent a civil war within Konoha. The Uchiha were going to attempt a coup d'état that could lead them to the Fourth Shinobi World War. Even though Sasuke still had his mother, he showed a deep desire to find and kill Itachi for what he did. Because of this, he didn't know the real reason why it had been done, since the knowledge could very well set him in a warpath against Konoha, and that just couldn't come to happen. Makoto did know what truly happened, and she had even helped with Itachi's mission by covering for him while he was doing his information gathering for Konoha. She wanted to leave everything behind her, but seeing the way Sasuke had turned out, because he had been raised mostly by his father after Itachi focused more on his career than anything else, she and Sasuke shared a cordial relationship at best nowadays. It was his hope that Naruto and Sasuke, with the help of Kakashi, could become friends, which would result in them forming bonds that would prevent them from turning against Konoha, though if how they interacted in the academy was anything to go by, then that happening was going to be difficult if not impossible. But as he was now, he could only hope that things turned in Konoha's favor, since the village was all that mattered in the end. Konoha, Training Ground 43. It was in the fourth day of his training that something interesting happened. Naruto had been coming to this training ground religiously for 4 days straight now, and he was extremely pleased by his advancement. His clones were already mixing up the chakra control exercises after what accumulated 450 days of chakra control training, since they trained for 12 hours every day for the past 3 days. Also, thanks to the mixed intellect of Naruto, Kushina, Minato and Kurama, along with his increased mental capabilities given to him by his enhanced brain, he was in no danger from information overload that came from overuse of the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. His other clones had also mastered the Henge, Kawarimi, Shunshin and Bunshin Daibouka to the point that he could do them without hand seals, and the Shuriken Kage Bunshin no Jutsu only required for him to make the ram hand seal. He supposed that the mastery was enough for him to be considered a more than just a competent ninja without being too suspicious of him. Because of that, his clones were only working on making the Shunshin battle worthy instead of just a way of fast transportation between 2 points. He didn't have to worry about tunnel vision since his advanced senses and perception prevented that. He only needed to modify the technique enough so as to make it possible to move in different directions instead of just a straight line. He suspected that he was going to end up creating an entirely new technique when he was finished, but he supposed that there weren't any issues with that. He had also decided what he was going to do about his taijutsu. He decided to mix the styles Kushina and Minato used and throw in some of the movements he had seen his classmates and who he now knew to be Maida Guy do when he was just Naruto Uzumaki. This way he could use very advanced taijutsu techniques without the danger of anyone recognize them, since he was going to be mixing the techniques, so it was going to look like an entirely original style, which suited him perfectly. Minato used fast and precise strikes aimed at key weak points in the body, while Kushina used a style that had her spinning this way and that while she attacked her opponent with punches, kicks, elbows, strikes and knee strikes. Mix that with random moves from other people and no one will recognize the style.
And about Kenjutsu, he decided not to use Chishiohime for now.
The blade was too eye-catching and there was no plausible explanation that he could come up with that could realistically explain why he had the blade. While he wanted to wield it, it wasn't too much of a pressing matter, so he left it sealed in one of the scrolls. He was sure he would come up with something in the future. He, however, knew that he needed weapons other than kunai, so he decided to look into a type of weapon that could complement his taijutsu style. He had an idea of what he wanted, and he hoped that he could find something close enough to it in Konoha. One thing that came from his mother that he decided was safe to use was her adamantine chakra chains, for the simple reason that not a lot of people knew that she had them, and two, she had claimed them to be a bloodline, so if he started to use it, everyone that cared would chalk it up to him unlocking it recently. And the chains could be used for almost anything, and they technically didn't require any chakra to use, since any chakra he used on them, as long as the chains weren't destroyed, would come back to him. And if that wasn't enough, he could absorb chakra through the chains and create barriers with them. The only difference between his chains and his mother's were that his chains were silver in color with a purple aura surrounding them. And finally, a side effect of his intense training was that his speed and strength had increased by a margin that wouldn't be possible for anyone else. The healing factor of the Uzumaki had combined with the regenerative capabilities of the kyuubi's chakra, giving him something that he dared to call instant regeneration. By his estimate, he could heal any wound as fast as it was made on any part of his body except his brain, which he supposed was the only way to kill him at the moment, to irreparably damage his brain. Heck, he was sure he could survive beheading as long as the contents of a cranium cavity were not damaged. Because of this, his muscles healed as fast as they teared, meaning that he was stronger and faster when he finished a training session than he was when it began, though he suspected that before long he was going to start using gravity and resistance seals on his body in order to see results. At the moment, his clones were working on the shunshin and sparring with each other with leaves sticking to their bodies while they walked on water or stuck to trees. The original was using the chakra chains to fend off the attacks of a contingent of clones. While he had the memories of Kushina to give him experience using them, it was not the same as using them himself. Really familiarizing himself with a technique would render a technique more effective than just remembering to be familiarized with it. Using clones was different because the clones were him, and through them was like he himself was doing it when their memories came back to him after they dispelled. 4 silver's chains sprouted from the middle of his back, and they were lazily waving around as he stared at the remaining clones. Suddenly, the chains tensed and the clones hurled 2 kunai at the original at speeds that most chunin would be hard-pressed to follow, let alone evade or block. This wasn't a problem for Naruto as 2 of his chains lashed out and knocked the 2 kunai out of the way while the remaining chains impaled the clones through the chest, dispelling them. Naruto rubbed his chest slightly, still not really used to the memories of being impaled, though he was used to the memories of being punched and or kicked. As his dismissed his chains, which were slowly sinking into his back, he perked up as he caught a new smell coming from the forest of death. Snakes, dango, blood and sake. It smells surprisingly good, said Naruto before he identified the scent as that of a woman. He heard her breathing slowly as she approached the edge of the forest facing towards TG-43. Once she settled on the edge, he managed to sense her emotions.
Curiosity, pleasant surprise, understanding, lust.
Naruto was curious himself, since as far as he knew no one willingly ventured into the forest of death, and he doubted that anyone would feel what this woman was feeling while inside. She was apparently watching him and there weren't any malicious feelings coming from her that were directed at him, so he let her be and do as she wished. It wasn't like he was training anything that could give away his new status. All the clones would seem weird, but she seemed to know who and what he was, so she would probably deduce what he was trying to do. So, he created 10 more clones that brandished kunai and the original did the same. The only reason he reacted on time was because of the sudden spark of mischievousness that came from the woman. He turned in that direction, only to see 3 shuriken flying directly at him. Anko Mitarashi was a beautiful woman that had light brown eyes, purple-tinted dark hair, a very voluptuous body that she wasn't afraid to show off and possibly the biggest mean streak in the entire village. She was well known for her sadism and penchant to play with men, making them believe she was flirting with them or seducing them only to cut them and lick their blood. She was also the second in command in Konoha's T&I, torture and interrogation, department and the only ninja in Konoha that willingly went to the Forest of Death to train. Today had been one of those days she found herself free of T&I responsibilities and she had wanted to get some good training in, so she had gone to TG-44 to fight and kill as many beasts as she could before she found herself exhausted. She had been on the east side of the forest when she had sensed a powerful chakra coming from TG-43, so naturally she had gone to investigate the rare occurrence. Nobody trained in TG-43 or TG-45 because of their closeness to her turf, as she fondly referred to the Forest of Death. Imagine her surprise when she saw the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi training there. The first thing that came to her mind when she saw him was that he was probably the most beautiful man she had ever seen, even counting the Yondaime. The second thing that came to her mind was that he was probably insane, or a genius, for using so many shadow clones to train in that manner. An insane genius, perhaps, and an extremely hot one at that, she thought with a giggle as she looked at him for a few seconds. The chains he was using sparked her memory of something she had seen before, but she couldn't really put her finger on it. She decided that it wasn't that important since she couldn't recall it instantly. She could see that they were wicked useful when he used them to reflect the kunai that were thrown at low jonin speeds and then impaled his clones with them at speeds that were at least mid-jonin. As she watched him rub his chest in discomfort and pause for a second, she thought, I shouldn't be that surprised, really. This guy managed to infiltrate the Hokage monument, knock out the Hokage somehow, steal the forbidden scroll, learn a jutsu from it and then kill the one who set up the trap, who was a seasoned chunin. And he had just failed the academy for not knowing how to do a simple bunshin. The world doesn't make any sense. She watched as he created 10 clones of himself and prepared to fight them. She grinned and pulled out 3 shuriken. Let's see just how good you are, really. Just as the last shuriken left her hand, he turned in her direction with an even look on his face. She watched, pleasantly shocked, as he tilted his head to the side just enough for the first shuriken to pass by his cheek with only a few centimeters to spare, cutting a few strands of his hair and dispelling one of the clones behind him. He used the kunai on his hand to deflect the second shuriken away from him and threw that same kunai at the last shuriken, deflecting it. She knew then that her position was truly compromised when he looked straight at her with an inquisitive eyebrow raised. Grinning, she jumped out of her hiding spot and landed a few feet away from him. She preened a little when he took a good look at her body before focusing on her face, his eyes not wandering, which impressed her even more. She also gave him a discreet look over and liked very much what she saw. Strong and defined chest, 6-pack abs and the most handsome face I've seen. Anko likes. Naruto gave the attractive woman that smelled so strange but oh so pleasant an inquisitive look. So, any chance you'd tell me why you attacked me out of nowhere? He asked bluntly, though inwardly he wasn't concerned. He could defeat her easily in case she attacked him, but there wasn't any chance happening as she was now only feeling pleased surprise and lust, which intrigued him and filled with a sense of pride that he couldn't quite explain. Anko heard the question and shrugged, doing wonderful things to her big beeps. They had to be at least a DD cup, thought Naruto absently with that motion. I just felt like it, she responded, earning a deadpan look from Naruto. She grinned then. So, who are you and what you doing here? She asked the obvious questions, only out of sense of formality. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her and then chuckled. I pretty much doubt that anyone not living under a rock doesn't know about me by now, with what I did a few days ago. And, as you can see, I am training. Though I'm curious, who are you? Anko's grin widened and she stroked an epic pose. I am the BP and single Anko Mitarashi. The most awesome and deadly interrogator and the only kunoichi among the ninja of Konoha that willingly trains in the Forest of Death. She declared before laughing cheerily. Nice to meet ya. Naruto gave her a look of amusement as he chuckled. As you probably know, my name is Naruto Uzumaki. Nice to meet you too, he said and extended his hand for a handshake. Anko beamed and grasped his hand with her own. You know? I think we are going to get along just fine, she said with a saucy grin, lengthening her words seductively and licking her lips slowly. She smirked victoriously when she saw him following the sensual motion with sparkling blue eyes that held as much lust as she was feeling for him at the moment. Still, the fact that he wasn't leering at only her body, but the entire package, impressed and flattered her like never before. Naruto released her hand slowly and nodded his head in agreement. Considering that you just tried to kill me because you were bored and curious, I believe it's safe to assume that we are going to become pretty close, very fast, he said with a smirk. The expression was enough to get Anko worked up for what he was alluding, and although she only knew the wonders of masturbation and other women, she was somewhat surprising that the thought of beep with Naruto, who was almost a decade younger than her, was far from unpleasant. Anko matched his expression with a bloodthirstier one of her own as she slowly pulled out a kunai. So, Wonder Boy, care to show a lady just what you can do? She jumped back and took a ready stance, slowly and sensually licking the kunai from base to tip. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her actions. For some reason I love what you did just now, Anko-chan, he said with a suggestive smile as he pulled out his own kunai and got into his own ready stance. Let's make this more interesting. Care for a wager? The winner has to pay for the other's dinner tonight. Anko's eyes shone brightly at that. The terms? She asked eagerly, almost bouncing. Enjoying the effect of her fidgeting making Anko's tits jiggle deliciously, Naruto simply spoke. As you are either a Chunin or a Jonin, me winning is out of the question, so let's make this about how much time I can last going against you. If I last more than 5 minutes, I win. If I don't make it to 5 minutes, then you win. Deal? Anko's grin went from ear to ear. Deal. To be continued, and thank you so much for watching.